This week, we speak with Sbano from Sisense. In the news segment, we catch up on vulns and iPhones, dangers of SIM swaps, 7 steps for AppSec, fuzzing, and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. False positives suck. With so many mobile apps to test, how much time will you waste on false positives? Eliminate them today with NowSecure. Only NowSecure automates static, dynamic, and interactive testing on real Android and iOS devices. Now you get speed, accuracy, and efficiency for DevOps, plus the broadest coverage of security, compliance, and privacy issues. Why waste time on false positives? Visit securityweekly.com/NowSecure to learn how to scale your mobile AppSec testing with NowSecure. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 75, recorded September 9th, 2019. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hey, Matt.
Happy Monday. Monday Night Football tonight. That's why I'm in my Raiders colors, because if I wear my Broncos colors, they'll definitely lose tonight.
Excellent planning ahead, and we'll have to find out next week what John's doing today, because we're missing John again. We miss you, man. Come back. 2 announcements. We have exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We are now partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you will be receiving 1 CPE credit per webcast. Register for one of our upcoming webcasts with Stephen Smith and Jeff Broucher of Logarithm, or Tom Stitt of ExtraHop, or both, by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you have missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find our on-demand library at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia this October 10th through 11th. If you are attending and would like to sponsor an interview, please submit your interest on our conference request form at securityweekly.com/booking. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 discount to attend the 2-day conference. Use discount code HH19SW when you register, or go to securityweekly.com/hackerhalted and register there. Sbano is an information security leader with over 13 years of experience, mainly in financial technology organizations. Currently, Ty is the Cloud Chief Information Security Officer at Sisense, who acquired Periscope Data in May 2019. Ty's career has been focused on developing application and product security programs for Capital One, JP Morgan Chase, Lending Club, and Target. Key areas of knowledge include developing security champions, threat modeling, secure code training, static code analysis, component analysis, dynamic analysis, penetration testing, and red teaming. Ty's security mentality has been concentrated on enabling engineering and product teams to securely move at the speed of the business to make it a competitive advantage. Ty graduated from Penn State University with a BS in Information Science and Technology, and from Norwich University with an MS in Information Assurance. He currently holds a CISSP, CEH, CCSK, and CPT. To learn more, please visit tysbano.com. Well, hello, Ty. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it.
And I won't use the Penn State thing against you, by the way, in this interview.
I mean, what's up with that? We got to start with football? I'm a nerd.
It's football season. I'm sorry. I'm a football guy.
We got 2 people from Penn State on the line here, so be careful. I think you're outnumbered at the moment.
I am, but when we're done with the season, we'll see where we stack up.
Fair enough.
Sounds good. Well, speaking of stacking up, I think Ty, you've stacked up quite a list of key areas of knowledge. I mean, I think you've pretty much ran the full range of application and product security, a bunch of many different topics. So I'm kind of curious as we start to maybe a couple different paths we go on here is what have you seen in terms of AppSec teams being centralized or decentralized? And what does it mean, regardless of that, even that model of the teams, how do you actually scale in one way or those others? And what does scale mean to you when dealing with AppSec?
Yep, I think that's always a tough question. And any AppSec program with any person that's been doing this for a while has to understand that it's specific to the organization and the attack surface and the threat model. So when it comes to application security at scale, I think that's where we have a tough aspect to really consider. So if there's multiple lines of businesses and you start to get into dedicated functions, the big thing for me with running programs that I've always been very much against is really the aspect that you're having pen testers, threat modelers, secure code reviewers. You just have a series of people doing software security practices. And if they focus just on the same product, sometimes the passion can be there, but oftentimes if you're running the same assessment, same practice, same threat model, same targeted abuse cases, you get kind of burnt out on it, and your longevity in that role doesn't really stack out. When you start to think of security at scale, say for a large bank, and you have your AppSec team kind of moving around the organization, they get to see so much more and they have an opportunity to interact with a lot more folks. So, just on that premise, I've always been more on the centralized function because that way you can really organize your spend, make sure that you're maturing and growing people, and you can actually have a better pipeline of growing junior people into senior people, addressing that cybersecurity gap that everyone keeps talking about. So I don't know. I've been more on the centralized focus. The decentralized, when it comes to more the agile world or the DevOps world, I see the benefit of individuals being in teams, but not so much from the standpoint that they don't have that direct line back to the AppSec team.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
so
that's an interesting challenge, right? If you think about centralized security teams, we potentially fall into the issues that we've seen over the years, which is they're kind of outside of the DevOps team, so they're outside of the CI/CD process, and therefore maybe a little behind when it comes to looking for security issues as part of that pipeline. And so how do you balance that, Ty, right? If centralization's good because you can see a lot of different things, how do you get aspects of that integration into the DevOps teams back so that you can shift left, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, like starting left, shifting left. I say shift throughout. I think the element there, Matt, that you started to hint at is really you don't have to be in the team. You just have to be part of the team. And what I mean by that is presence. PowerPoint over presence or just presentations over presence. It's DevOps and Agile are just a mindset, right? It's not a dedicated team or a function. Sometimes they are. We'll just leave that aside there. But I think the big element is always going to come back to, are you present? So are you going to go to stand up? Are you going to be part of the bug triage process? Are you going to join the team for retros? Those are the elements that allow you to be part of that systematic growth of community, that growth of mindset, and that opportunity to integrate. So, how do you accomplish that? Show it up.
Yeah, well, I wish more security folks would show up, right? I think the challenge is they sit over here to the side, and sometimes they don't have that conversation to actually be present as part of the original team. So one of the things I've always talked about for the past few years is, guys, ask the question. Talk to the DevOps teams, understand what's going on so you can get engaged in the process. Because if you're sitting over here in your little bubble, forget it.
Yeah, the bubble's never good. I've called it the ivory tower a few times, depending on where the location of the seating is or how much cool stuff security has. But you're hitting it right on the head. Like, why not just be part of the team? Why not show up to where the team sits, where the discussions are happening, as opposed to just waiting and complaining? If you're that security team, I'm just going to look out. If you're that security team waiting for customers to come to you, or you're waiting for constituents in your company to come to you to say pen test or do a security review, you better have a great marketing aspect to get the information out there so that they're engaging. However, the reality is most people want you to just show up. Most people just want you to be part of the conversation and not have to always invite you. I think it's figuring out the right cadence and the pattern within the organization of knowing what type of presence is necessary.
Yeah, and I really like how you're highlighting that participatory aspect of it, because you even said, showing up to stand-ups. As a security person, you don't show up to stand-ups to hand people and say, where are you on this 100 count checklist of our security checklist. You show up there to say, what are you working on? Oh, that sounds interesting. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? And I think
Yep.
that's what makes it a much more fruitful engagement, a much more successful way of actually building security into that application.
Yeah, and I know you have the experience in the background, right? Like that 100 questionnaire, like 100 question questionnaire, like it's not showing up and saying where we're at. It's showing up and saying like, how can I help? Or making sure that you're facilitating a lot of the answering of the questions. And one of the benefits I think of doing this for a while, you want to make people's lives easier. So you should do the majority of the questions that you can answer, validate that they're correct, but then take the next step with the team and say, I think these are the top 3 risks that we should really be getting at. Or can I just peel off from this stand up and get some help?
So one of the challenges, though, is that it can always. I think it's fantastic to be participating, to have that model where AppSec is working with, call them DevOps teams or just call them developers or engineers, whatever the product teams are. But one of the challenges is what happens when that gets really big. So I'm going to guess you've been in environments where a large web app is, or a large number of web apps isn't in the dozens. It's probably going to be a little bit bigger than that. So how do you tackle that? What does scale mean to you, and how do you tackle it?
Yep. And I think that's always the tough question. And when you're in AppSec or information security, any team that has to work at scale, the average data point I think we've seen consistently is 1 application security engineer per 100 developers. That's like the base premise of ratio that we've seen over and over. So when you start to think about product, I don't think it's always the same. So if you have, say, a dozen applications and what's internet facing, what's branded, what's third party developed and outsourced and where you put your contract language versus what's insourced. But when you start to think about that, say 5,000 plus or 9,000 applications, it gets into a strange place. I can't deny that. But you have to rely on more systematic techniques to make sure that your hygiene is appropriate. So while 9,000 may sound scary, you start the risk ranking process or just profiling to get a better sense of what is the risk of these 9,000. Because what if 8,999 of them are all internal green screen systems for your call center, and then you have 1 internet facing application that's purely for marketing, right? And I think that's the element where if you take a step back, you don't panic, and you bring a towel and you hang out for a little bit and you understand where you're at in the grand scheme of how do you scale. You take that thought process, that risk ranking, you validate it with the business to make sure you're investing in the right places. And you're also staying in tune with the organization to say, where should we be investing our time and money, especially if we're about to get acquired or if we're going to, do some acquisitions, maybe we're going to put more time and energy on that forefront. So it's a matter of like being smart based on data.
But I think that's still a big challenge for most security teams. I think IT teams in general, right? That asset inventory. What applications do I have? Are they internet facing? I mean, just those basics of knowing which applications and how they're classified is not, it's not easy for some organizations today. And I think it only gets harder as things speed up from the business side and more stuff's getting deployed. Where is that inventory that you can use to really help get a really good risk assessment done to say, these are my top X apps in the environment?
Yep. And typically at that scale, you usually have a dedicated IT team that has to, budget for the amount of infrastructure, understand where the spend, who the owners are. So you can usually latch onto that and be a partner to the effort. The system of truth, I think that's what we're hinting at. Like, where do you choose to put it? Where do you choose to gain from it as well? And I think that's an element, looking back at the programs I've ran at scale, the system of truth is where everyone's already working. That's the watering hole. Maybe it's a place where people are pissed constantly because things are out of date. But if you can be part of the scenario of evolution, bringing more truth to it, having more touch points, I think a lot of the teams are going to benefit from that effort. So when it comes to that N,000th organization of applications, start simple. Mike and I were chatting about this. Maybe 3 questions, maybe 5 questions, whatever you want it to be, it's fine. But I think, what is the accessibility of it, right? Like, is it internet facing or is it internal? And then, do you care about reputation and brand? Those are event driven questions that I usually get into. And if it's internet facing, I usually ask authentication questions of, the standard issued MFA that we're doing for all customers, or maybe it's just username and password because it's a specific product that, maybe it's targeted a specific segment of the organization, or maybe externally at customers. Then we have an idea of the why behind the risk. Then you get into more the element of like, what's the data? And I think this is where a lot of AppSec teams trip up. If you don't have this inventory already, you're about to empower a lot of other teams that may not be empowered. And PCI is one of them, Sarbanes-Oxley. But the data elements within the application, you can start to just click and shoot. Like, what are those things in that application? And then you can have that inventory effectively of what's going to be there. And then ultimately, outside of that, if you didn't get any of the business context because it wasn't internet facing and you didn't event drive, I definitely recommend an element of like, what is the business risk? So typically that's defined in some sort of IT system. But if you're starting from scratch, you don't have like, recovery time objective, recovery point objective, things like that. You are going to have to partner with the organization to make the case for an app inventory, which might be an effort that security has to push.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, talking about app inventory, asset inventory, that goes back to absolutely the basics, the good basics, but the basics of the programs. I'm curious, Ty, if you've seen when teams move to cloud or adopt cloud deployments, does that make actually asset inventory or even this analysis of what data is going into the apps, does that make it any easier, or is there tooling that can actually make this easier for teams? Or are they still stuck in the same challenges of building up these inventories that they've had for 10, 20, even 30 years by now?
I think there's potential for making it easier. Having an inventory of what is infrastructure is nice, to actually being able to use something like AWS's CLI to pipe out, what are our EC2 instances, what are our internet facing like network interfaces, right? Like, those are elements that are just systematic, and it is the truth, because it's not like some cruddy data center that's sitting in the back that may be used for testing, or perhaps it's used for all of everything in the organization, but the change management process is through a clunky system that maybe the security team doesn't have access to. And I think moving to the cloud, or the air quote, just shifting to the cloud, like, those are things where I think it's very empowering. I think there are elements where you just have more systematic access. Now, the flip side to that, like, there shouldn't be an over reliance on things like, security tooling or native security controls like AWS Macie that are just going to tell you the truth. But if you can snap in that additional touch point to say, hey, how truthful is our questionnaire? And you use something like Macie to say, oh, crap, this application now has PCI data or something that we didn't realize. Well, feed that back into your profile. Your inventory becomes more truthful. You have more awareness. And I think the same thing about data loss prevention and some of the newer emerging cloud-focused DLP tools that are out there today.
Yeah, it sounds like it's describing that source of truth, or that data is always going to be messy, but having a shorter feedback loop to build it up over time and just tease out get it more accurate over time is definitely the way to go. And honestly, it sounds like something you have to expect to do, whether it's a small or large company.
Yep. Continuous feedback, always going to be in your benefit, right?
Yeah, and I mean, under the previous scenario, that's assuming you know where all your AWS accounts are.
Well,
AWS
I always
knows when they
recommend
bill you.
go to finance, right? You have to know where all they're at. It's no different than software spend. I think about this as I've kind of stepped into a larger role at Sisense. Thinking about where money goes to will ultimately lead you to where all of your accounts and your tooling is. So having a strong partnership with your finance team to see who's expensing what is a big benefit, unless you can have like a cloud access security broker with an inline network analysis going on. I think there are elements that you can get to that information in reality. Now, if someone's just starting up an AWS account and it's free, yeah, that can be pretty painful, and I'm sure we've all been through that.
Definitely.
Ty, you were also talking about, it was great to that idea of keep these questionnaires for the engineering teams short and concise, and get them focused on risk. Is there a particular You didn't go into too much detail. You talked about a couple of the questions. You didn't get too much about particular risks that you maybe would focus on. Do you have even like a personal short list of the things that either are the idea of what keeps you up at night, or even that you try to focus on first when an AppSec team first engages with with a product?
Yeah, I'll hit the first one. Not much keeps me up at night. I'm in a very enjoyable position for the first time in my career where I get to sleep. So that's new.
Awesome.
That's just brand new for me. And I have to take a moment because
Congratulations.
the past year has been fantastic. So outside of that, when you start thinking about risk, I think we had this chat. Like, let me ask you guys. I think this is always a tough question. This is probably the toughest, hardest hitting question I've ever been asked. What's an app?
Yeah. Is it the URI?
Yep. That has never, in all the times that I've been doing consulting, writing scanners, everything, that it's absolutely more an art than science. And it's sometimes it's sort of like the counter question comes back, either how much time do I have or how much budget do you have? Because sometimes it's just how complex is the functionality, APIs, maybe you can walk through the endpoints, but then you need to build up state and how many, what other microservices does this microservice have to talk to? So already you can tell I'm rambling on and a much longer answer because, yeah, not an easy question to answer.
And it hasn't been for a long time, to Ty's point, right?
Yep.
And so how do you know what an app is when an app is a bunch of microservices and containers all communicating via APIs that might have multiple URL entry points into the system? Is each of those an app? So it is a challenge.
Yep, I think that's a great point that's emerging now is elasticity of applications. So you have all these pods just growing immediately, and point in time, they're probably gone. The good thing is they're coming from some trusted state or some build or some configuration. However, I think let's dive into like APIs. I think that's an area where sometimes teams may forget that there's an old API, or maybe there's a version 1 that sat out there for like 6 customers, and you have 20 other iterations, and everyone's just talking about V21, and yet everyone forgot about the previous 20. But the first version is sitting out there without, say authentication on the endpoint, and those 6 people may be abusing the shit out of it because no one's watching it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been the struggle from the hygiene standpoint of what is an application, and I think you just kind of heard it here between the 3 of us. It's not an easy answer.
Yeah, and if you can crack that nut, then you can actually apply some really basic, simple risk metrics to it. Say, look, is it internet facing? Okay, higher risk. Does it have PII data or credit card data or whatever, right? Then it's probably a higher risk application. But just getting to the understanding of what the app is, I think, is still this big challenge for a lot of people.
I feel like that's a
Totally.
good sticker for the back of a laptop, what the app is, and I think that's an element where, find out what's important to the business. That there have been times I've worked for an organization for 5.5 years. There are times I've been there for like 12 months. It really just depends on, how much fun it is, how much enjoyment is coming out of the work and the results and the impact, and obviously compensation within our current environment. But when you start to have a better definition of what the business cares about, I think that's where you should be spending the time. Because if you're spending, I think if you're spending all this time on, say, an internal application because it holds all the secrets, I get it. But at the same time, if the business is launching a brand new mobile application with new API endpoints, and you can't scale to the demand because you're spending so much time on the other things, you're not going to be, I'm not going to say liked, but you're not going to be perceived as someone that knows what the hell's going on inside the organization, right? And I think brand and impact really come into play when you're driving any program, any function within an organization, and choosing what to make an impact on first, and how you drive that sentiment further will lead you to the gravitas to either build a massive scalable program, or you'll find a quicker exit and be like, yeah, this ain't for me.
Does digital transformation help? I know that term is used a lot, but if you think about what that means to an organization, it means the business trying to interact at a more digital level with their customers. And those projects are the ones that you're seeing adopt some of these new agile DevOps methodologies. is that an opportunity for security to really start to understand what the business is doing and kind of break out of their shell? Because to me, I think that would be a great opportunity for them to kind of expand beyond what they've traditionally been doing, which is maybe just a bunch of internal application protection.
Yeah, great question. I've been through two. I thought I was all about transformation, but at this point, it's kind of, I'm not going to say boring. I think there's just a lot of lessons and a lot of struggles as you go through it. So what that means is there's a lot of feelings that go into this. And the feelings can be a little bit exhausting if you're kind of like me. Like, feelings are good if you're building an internal team, but feelings can be terrible if people and team members are struggling with adopting new practices, don't want to be part of this change in the organization. When you look at your change management matrix of like where there are stragglers versus where there are going to be leaders, digital transformation, it's just going to have a spread of everything. And all feelings are 100% valid. And honoring everyone's feelings in the process is going to take time and energy. So I think the transformation of learning, if people are up for the challenge and being a part of that learning and that transformation at that time, like entering a program or an organization when it's at the first steps of a digital transformation, I think it could be an absolutely empowering opportunity. Plus, you get to slide in all these little touch points and all these capabilities without a ton of friction because everyone's going through this learning process. So I'd veer on the side of absolutely. The problem that you typically emerges is, again, all the historical stuff that sits in the background, sits in the data center, and you still accept crappy patterns like one-way SSL instead of two-way SSL. Like things like that can start to break down because you have all of this tech debt or this tribal debt that sits there because everyone's so stoked about moving to the future.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting because when you were talking about teams and like what is an app, and one of the ways I usually try to focus on that is, find who the teams, who are the people responsible for either one of the microservices or many and so on, because you're ultimately working with the teams to address problems, to understand the security model, to go through threat models, et cetera.
Yep.
But, and this kind of ties into what you were just noting about tech debt, what I was just describing only works if there's actually an owner for that application. But especially when you're getting into 5,000, 10,000 apps, you're going to find a ton that have no owner. And when you go and try to turn it off, suddenly a major revenue stream goes away, or suddenly a whole cascading domino effect of these other apps that didn't even know they relied on it start to complain. So I'm kind of curious how you've seen that in the past, and if you have good ways of, good advice or good ways to try to tackle those orphaned or, unknown apps.
Yeah, I think business point of contact is always going to be important as far as your application inventory. I think there's kind of the real owner of the application. You typically have the engineering team associated with it, but there should be some top level executive owner on top of that entire inventory, and then per line of business or per function. So a lot of the success I found was finding kind of that initial touch point, but even before getting there, finding the accountable executive that owns that series of applications or that line of business. And then from there, getting the sub list of, who are the directors or who are the people that are managing the people to get me down to the point of I actually have a business contact. And every time you do a refresh, I think it's based on the risk of the application. So one thing we didn't talk about is kind of health and touch points of your app inventory. So getting through the first pass, it's typically going to be painful. There's no doubt about it because you're asking a lot of people to do work. And then from there, if you get through that first pass, I can tell you about a time, it took me 3 months to get through, 5,000 applications that got rationalized through a large banking process. And then I went to a retailer. It took 9 months to get through like 6,000 applications. And it's going to vary based on the culture. I'm not going to say I'm thrilled about all the timelines. I think this should be fast and easy. But after that first touch, you have to figure out when is your next one. And if it's a high risk application in a, say, non-DevOps shop, I would say once a year is probably fine. And then the lower risk is going to be the 2 to 4 years because they'll just trickle off. But if you're in a high rate of delivery, your touch points are going to have to be that much higher because changes in teams, movement of owners of applications, little things like that are just going to pop up all the time. And you're going to have to systematically find a way to really update and keep that inventory fresh.
Yeah.
When I was when I was rattling off a long list of your background, we're hitting pen testing, red teaming, static analysis, dynamic analysis. We're talking about those touch points. Do
Yep.
you have a particular tool or approach that you tend to prefer? Or what are the, or maybe a better way to say that, or what are the contexts that make you choose between like a static analysis or dynamic analysis or a pen test or something else for that matter?
Yep, I think it's contextual. It's really down to the application and the organization. So find me right now. I work at an organization that enables business intelligence, business analytics. So basically, it's a UI tier that hooks into databases and ultimately enables SQL injection. So find me a tool that can run static analysis effectively in a world that you type SQL, you get charts. And there really isn't a great opportunity there. Even things like cross-site scripting, injection, they're intentional based on the nature of the user of the application because they're authorized, they have great access, they're usually data scientists that have all the data anyway. But figuring out how you get secure touch points into that is a much different approach than, say, your traditional mobile banking application. And that is something I think you're going to have more consistency around how those touch points look based on the maturity of the world. So web apps, I mean, we have a dime a dozen as far as how many web application security scanners are out there. And some of them,
Mhm.
they're free, they're open source, and there's a really healthy community. Some of them are really expensive because they target a specific language that may be unique to your organization. But I don't think there's a hard framework that I follow at this point anymore. I'm still a big fan of things like the Building Security and Maturity Model, BSIM, the OpenSAM, which is the Software Assurance Maturity Model from OWASP. I think they're good places to start for measurement, but I'd never recommend taking those charts or those data points and showing them to your CEO or CIO and saying, "Hey, look how far we've come in this great spider chart." Because I want to be honest, they don't give a shit. It's how secure are we? How are we doing? Are we doing the right things? Are we investing in the right places? And are you keeping all the team members happy and enabled? And I think that's where you, as an AppSec person, need to make the intelligent decision as far as the right tooling and not just saying everyone's going to run a dynamic scanner and good luck. Well, the AppSec team now just became a support function that has to train all these developers, and the developers' capabilities just dropped, I don't know, 20, 25% because now they're having to learn this new skill that is not inherent to what an engineer should be doing, which is building product.
Yes,
That's
the
really
challenges
cool.
of dynamic scanning, right, Mike?
There are more than a few. Let me say that. But one of the things is I also like how you're describing like paying attention to the team. In other words, it's not like you have an AppSec team and here is the context for that fantastic dynamic scanner that they could run or source analysis or pen testing. It's more of like, and I think you mentioned this earlier too in the interview, just throwing people into the same routine work is a great way to burn them out. It's a great way to make them bored. So that I want to really highlight that part of it that's coming out during this conversation because you're talking about investing in where to reduce risk, where to secure applications, but also sounds like investing in the people side in terms of actually making a really functional, good participating application security program as well. And so that people care about what they're doing and they're not being burned out by the type of work that they're running into.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like, we all want to be happy with what we do with our time on this world. And, I think AppSec doesn't stop just within your company. I don't think information security or the mindset stops within just your program. And I think it's our duty, maybe not all of our duties, but, I think it is my duty as far as an information security professional. Like, if I can harvest and help someone kind of mature their mindset and grow into this thing that may have already been natural inside their brain, as far as asking, why does something work this way and how can I get it to benefit me in some other fashion? I think the hacker mindset and how you put on your hacker goggles are kind of natural. They're inherent into your personality. So when you start questioning these things, you want to understand why they work. And if you have been doing this thing for your career and you can train an engineer, you can train an intern, you can train, a QA tester that now knows how to break into, WebGoat because they've been able to use Burp Proxy for free. And now they're like, hey, I spent $300. I went and got this burp license and I've been testing a bunch of apps. And I'm like, hang on, let's talk about the gray lines of like what's okay to test and what's not okay to test. And they're like, it's cool. I found more like testable images and I'm figuring it out. Now I'm applying it at work. What can happen in that moment, and I've found a lot of solace in, is that that person can become one of the best pen testers, that can become one of the best red teamers on your team. And it may take a year or two. Maybe it takes 5 years. But I think the element there is you're helping grow people into finding more joy in what they do in their work. And the coolest thing for me is like one specific company I worked for, an engineer joined our team, took on static analysis, ran the hell out of it for about a year and a half, 2 years, moved back to a town where his family was from to grow his family. And he rolled a static analysis program for a very large retailer, and getting a call from a friend in my network saying, where did you find this guy? And it's just like, well, he already had it. He just needed the opportunity to learn like security specific things. And now applying that knowledge has changed his whole career trajectory. So I think that's the benefit, right? Like maybe it doesn't change the career trajectories, but if it asks one more question, if it prompts one more user not just to click through that, okay, I accept that this site doesn't have a certificate, or question that email that looks funky, I think we're kicking butt, you know? And I think the reality is more people are becoming aware of security and the implications of things like privacy now, which are an emerging topic that I think people should fundamentally care about.
Yeah. And you're creating security champions internal to the teams, which is fantastic, because then it's somebody internally bringing up those security items instead of this, external security group, and creating those internal security champions, I think, are awesome. Plus it allows them to potentially change your career trajectory, like in that particular case.
100%. Yeah. I love the champions mindset in the programs. There's pros and cons to it. Everyone kind of has an opinion about it, but I'm just all about an optional program that gives away free swag and then, just recognizes folks that are making the company better. And if you can do that and not put too many confines around what it must be, you will find so many people just thinking things are cool. They're like, hey, I'm showing up to your class because I want a freaking bobblehead that you created for this program. But they learned about security, so it's a win-win, right? And I think that's an element that sometimes we forget because it may be somewhat of a buzzword in certain organizations that are trying to get something way too mature for their company off the ground, when they can just start with, hey, let's do an optional security training and see who shows up.
Yep. That's great.
Totally. Well, we've had a podcast, the great interview this episode, and hopefully lots of people show up to listen to it. Ty, thank you for being here. Any final words or anything that we should be looking out from you on the horizon?
Yeah, just two things. I would love to plug. I just did a white paper called Security Touchpoints in the Big Data Lifecycle with Cobalt.io. I've never done business with them. We just do a bunch of marketing stuff together. And this was one of the cooler projects we did with writing a white paper in simple language as far as AppSec people or security people that may have strayed away from what does big data look like and then how do you secure it. So we put together a simple white paper that really outlines a couple of touch points, hopefully things that you're already doing to empower data scientists and data engineers. Yeah, just go check that out. It's on Cobalt's website, or hit me up on LinkedIn, Ty Sbano. And I think that's an element where I'm always open to a conversation. The other element I would love to just land on is the big piece around security. We've kind of hinted at it within this talk today, but my ask to the rest of the security community is getting off of our stools, getting our butts out of seats, and actually going and being part of the opportunity of driving a greater culture of security, but also empowering the business to just kick ass. And if you're at a company and you have stock options or you have unvested options that may become stock, don't you want your company to succeed? And I think where I'm going to pull back and say, if you're not happy as a security person and you're that curmudgeon that no one wants to work with, please do your best to find what drives you and makes you happy, and get out of that role and go do that next thing that's just going to be part of a better opportunity altogether. Because I think we all benefit when we're happy and excelling. So yeah, those are my two things.
No, yeah, I'm happy to hear it, because I love that message, and definitely, let's get rid of the cynicism and focus on, let's actually make something better. Let's fix a problem or just move on.
Let's do some cool shit, just like this
Absolutely.
talk. Thanks for the time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Ty, and thanks again, Matt. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to return with news of the week.